My name is Tim Carter, and I'd like to speak just for a moment about the upcoming election. It's just days away now. I did a video recently about what's at stake, speaking of the need to replace Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court with someone who was proficient in the science of hermeneutics, an originalist and a textualist who would adhere to the doctrine of constructionism, as it's called. And if the President of the United States soon to be elect, is someone that is not in favor of a constructionist, or someone who is part of what we call conservatism, then the Supreme Court will be handed over and transition to a more liberal, I think is the word. Most of my life I've never known the conservative party movement or the conservative movement to not always bring up things like national security, social security, now the debt crisis, 20 trillion I think is what they say it is, now terrorism, homeland security, we should secure our nation's borders. They say 1.5 or over a million babies a year are being killed. So it almost makes you wonder who's conning whom, because the first word in conservative is cons. And if the cons who have infiltrated the conservative movement or among the conservative party, who keep stepping back away from the man they've championed to the top, which he applied and was awarded the privilege of running as a candidate for the nominee of the Republican Party. He filed his papers. I think they welcomed him as someone who would bring out the vote. But what's really strange is if it's true that the next 4 years over 1 million children, because of Roe v. Wade not being overturned, would be continue to be losing their lives before they have the opportunity to be born into this world, and that's a big deal to them, then what is it that's so dire about their candidate that they're now saying, well, we don't vote pro-life anymore, we vote profanity, I suppose, because apparently the profanity of the candidate, the worldliness, I suppose, his ethical problems as far as his personal behavior seem to outweigh a $20 trillion debt, national debt. It seems to outweigh the crisis with ISIS. It seems to outweigh the Second Amendment, the inalienable rights of the Bill of Rights in our Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. So it kind of will be the first time in my life as a pastor, especially on November 9th, should these cons who've infiltrated the conservative party or have supplanted the conservative movement by alarming everyone with national debt, threat to gun ownership, the abortion, the Supreme Court, and all these alarming things that are so severe. If now it just took some profanity and unethical behavior, apparently they don't consider it their responsibility to come alongside their candidate and to begin to influence him in a positive direction, to get him on board with the successful behavior for the cause of conservatism. It looks like on November 9th, if they have their way, these cons among the conservatives have their way, then the Republican Party, I think that's what they still call themselves, will now be the ones responsible for the national debt, the insecure borders, the threat to Social Security, the diminishing of rights to bear arms, and all of our inalienable rights. They'll now be responsible for who's on the Supreme Court. So as a pastor, it'll be in one way a relief, because now there's no party we have to endorse, and we won't be penalized because these alarmists who say everything's at stake, we're going to go off the cliff, and their champion that they've nominated, he's still saying that. He's still trumpeting the horn and sounding the alarm and saying, this is it, folks. If we don't do something now, we're going to lose this country. Well, not according to the cons. That's the first word in conservative. But the cons are saying that they can't support this movement any longer. I think they're just finally going to concede that they really weren't interested in the Supreme Court nominees, as long as they're not responsible, as long as you don't blame them, as long as you reelect them. Then now neither political party has any social platform that is capable of being distinguished. Neither of them will after November 8th, because of the cons having their way of pulling out their support, allowing this movement to fall on its face. It's like they have a name to cover their own shame, because in the name of the distasteful candidate that they've championed to the top, who has rallied support from citizens in the United States that I'm not sure I knew they were out there. He has a very diverse demographic. But if you've been conned by the Cons-ervatives, don't be disappointed, don't be disillusioned. Just know that as of November 9th, we'll no longer be able to demarcate the party system. Partisanship will be over in the United States. Someone can say they're a Democrat, but that won't mean any more than saying you're a Republican. Someone can say they're a Republican, but really what would that mean if someone that would have appointed constructionist, originalist, and textualist judges onto the Supreme Court, who could have then overturned Roe v. Wade, weren't then appointed because of these cons, then it really couldn't have been as important to them as they wanted us to think it was. And if you really buy into the thing that, well, if it wasn't for the distasteful attributes of our candidate, the severity of our cause would be something we would continue to engage, and we would do something about it. But if you can pull away from your conservative cause over nothing more than what we all have known, because in my lifetime I've never known a time where Donald Trump was not a public figure, an iconic figure, where he wasn't a rich flamboyant, where all the media wasn't flocking to him to interview him, where they weren't making headlines about his bankruptcies or about his divorce, or tabloids were just filled with admiring his wonderful, luxurious lifestyle. But now that he's the candidate who represents conservatism, now that he could have won, should the cons not have pulled out, he could have then reversed the Supreme Court. It's not really Donald Trump I'm not taking seriously anymore. How can you take the cons seriously when they can tell you that it's so dire, the $20 trillion national debt, when it's so dire, the war against terrorism, when it's so important to protect our right to bear arms, when it's so important to appoint the right kind of Supreme Court justices, and all of that is so important, and to say that it's so important to be pro-life, pro-gun, and then they say all that, and then all of a sudden, for nothing but profanity. So the Cons-ervative party is now no longer pro-life, it's pro-vanity. So I guess the new bumper stickers will say, "We vote pro-vanity." And that'll be cute, because no one will really care, because they don't care. If you can't no longer care about a $20 trillion debt, a global war on terrorism, inalienable rights being jeopardized and at risk, the millions of babies that, like, I think his name's Paul Ryan, he leads the conservatives, who says that's at stake. If all that can just say, well, we'll just have to suspend that for 4 more years, well, if your cause is so serious that you can pause and take a 4-year break, I'm not really at all upset with Donald Trump at all. I'm certainly not upset with Hillary Rodham Clinton. She's been very consistent her whole life. Her resume speaks very well of what it looks like when you become the part of the system. She is the system, but she's honest about it. She never apologizes for her position against unborn children, against gun violence and the deaths of so many young people. She doesn't apologize for the need to distribute wealth. She recognizes it under the system that she has actually produced in this country. At least she's consistent. But you say, well, what value is that? Well, the cons are getting on board. They're saying, let's be consistent as well. Let's allow the social issues such as pro-life, pro-gun, pro-choice, whatever these buzzwords are now. Let's allow the national debt. Let's allow the Affordable Care Act. Let's allow universal health care. Let's allow whatever we have been telling people is so severe and needs to be corrected. Let's just kind of let it ride a few more years and see what happens. So if there's anyone that shouldn't be taken seriously, it's not Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, and it's not Hillary Rodham Clinton, the Democratic candidate. It is, and not even her supporters. They say that party of which she represents as the candidate of their choice is very united. They're very consistent. They won't be persuaded. They won't walk away from their platform. The people that will walk away from their platform are the cons in the conservative movement. So if you've been conned, it's by a con, and they're very much should be marked and noted. You should never forget who these people are. Never fall for it again. I won't. I'll tell my sons after November 8th. When you see a guy come along, check him out as an individual. It won't matter anymore if he's got an R beside his name, or a D, or an L, or a G. Is he Green Party, Libertarian, Democratic, or Republicans? Because finally, the partisan system is dissolved. One could no more suppose a Republican to care about the national debt than the Democrat he accuses as being responsible for it. No one can any longer suppose that a Republican is pro-life any more than the Democrats he's accusing of not being pro-life. No one can any more suppose that the national security and the Social Security is a concern of a Republican any more than the Democrats that they've made a living accusing of not doing something about it. We've seen the Republican Party hold the presidency. We've seen them hold the House and the Senate, and nothing changed. This time, though, they pulled out a little too soon, making it obvious who's responsible for the outcome of the election. Not the Democratic Party, not the Green Party, not the Libertarian Party, but for the first time in my life, it has been shown openly, and I can now point and show my sons and anyone that asked me as a pastor. I said, oh yes, the outcome of this election was determined by the cons among the conservatives who looked like and pretended like and talked like national debt was severe, war on terrorism is a crisis, the borders need to be secured. If we don't do something about the Supreme Court, we're going to lose our judiciary system, we're going to lose the rights of the states. And they just go on and on and on. But now that simply can be trumped by nothing more than the antics of a billionaire playboy, no antics of which we're aware to date have been inconsistent with anything we've known about him for his entire public lifetime. I really don't know what could be told to me about the candidate of the Democratic Party. I don't know what someone could tell me about her husband that we don't all know. I don't know what anyone could tell me about Donald Trump. No tabloid photo would even be a factor to someone that faces the world of reality. But if the conservative movement can simply be derailed, it will only be derailed this time. And the Supreme Court will now finally, I can tell people, beware of that conservative party, because they are the reason why we don't have conservative judges on the Supreme Court. They're why we have an escalating national debt. They're why we're losing our inalienable rights. They're why our borders are not controlled. And finally, we have relief now. At least we can stop picking on the Democrats, who are so consistent, so faithful to their cause, that at least you can believe them when they say what they're advocating, because they truly mean it. But whoever these people are, I noticed there was an article over 100 people, or 100 top conservatives have withdrawn support. Some say it's now 160, some say it's more than 200. It's remarkable that they had me convinced that the national debt was a factor, a matter that we should be concerned with. They had me convinced that the Supreme Court and the type of justices that we appoint in the future would matter. They had me convinced that the inalienable rights of our Bill of Rights were in jeopardy and were at risk, and we need to guard them. They had me convinced Homeland Security was a very vital thing in this nation. Social Security was important, getting our economy back on track and generating jobs. They had me convinced. But whoever these hundreds are, I'll make sure I save that list. I'll make sure I note that, because if you'd have told me George W. Bush would no longer vote pro-life but rather profanity, knowing what we know about his past, knowing his antics and the struggles he had in his own life and what he struggled through as a result of reaping what he sowed and his own battles with his own personal demons, I just find it hard to believe that the Bush family would be appalled at something Donald Trump said. Did they not raise their own sons? Did they not remember all the battles and the antics that took place during the young years of a young Texas oil man? And I remember George H. Bush supporting his son, getting him through his personal... I remember George W. Bush admitting his own battle with alcoholism. I'm not sure, though, that I can take Cons seriously any longer, because if you're telling me these people who have blown the trumpet of crisis over and over and over and told us something's at stake, but now over what now? Tabloid headlines? What have you never seen Entertainment Tonight? Have you not watched ETV? Have you not read the Inquirer while you're standing in the line at the retail store? I don't know what they're saying to us. It's anything different than what we've already heard, except somebody's pretending. And if they think they'll get away with it this time, it won't be this time, because this time they've shown themselves to be the cons that they've always been. They just don't want to be responsible for, oh my, we hate how the country's going, we can't believe. We'll try to stop that Supreme Court Justice appointee that she will nominate. They're already getting ready for the rhetoric. They'll do nothing will change until you remove the cons. It is true, one thing, the candidate of the Conservative Party is right. He said it's rigged, but not by the people he's accusing. Not by the system that he's trying to point to Bernie Sanders or to Hillary Rodham Clinton or the technology or the politics or the FBI. No, it doesn't take the FBI scandal and collusion. It doesn't take the email scandal of Hillary Rodham Clinton. None of those things have anything to do with the outcome of the election. What it took to change and alter the outcome of the election were a group of people. The first word is cons in conservative. And they have now gone out in the name of something so insignificant. You say, well, I thought it mattered what someone said and how they spoke. Well, we could deal with that in the process of nominating their candidate. Well, I thought it mattered what these women have to say. It does matter, and there's a adjudicating process and litigious court system that worked all that out. But now, this late in the game, something now that could have come up anytime they wanted to bring it up. At any time, these conservatives, cons, could have said, we don't want this man to be our nominee, and never even allowed him to apply to run for the Republican Party. But isn't it strange that the Republican Party is not responsible for their candidate? The leaders of the conservative movement are now cons, backing away, and they want you to look at Hillary. They want you to... I don't need to read that woman's emails. What could you tell me about that lady's emails? Who could be in the government in elected offices for 30 plus years and go through all the things that we know they've gone through? And my goodness, their lives are riddled with controversy. But what's new about it? Well, what's new this time is the cons are pulling out. But they're pulling out before the election. That's remarkable. You'd have thought they'd have been quiet. You'd have thought they could have maintained their hypocrisy just a little bit longer, but they ran out of energy. Social media caught them. The media caught them. Now, after November 8th, on November 9th, you don't have to decide to watch CNN or Fox, because you can just go back to the previous channel, because what will be the difference between Fox and CNN? Where will be your conservative news broadcast and your liberal news? But there will be no such thing after November 8th, because the outcome will not have been determined by what the conservatives call the liberals. It will not be determined because of the rigged system that Donald Trump is pointing to. He just needs to trumpet the reality that the cons have backed out of the conservative movement and have thought it's so serious, the conservative movement, that they can take a break for 4 years. So it's not funny. It's just, I guess it's better to laugh than to cry, because it wasn't important to me that I support a man like Donald Trump. It wasn't important to me that I support a lady like Hillary Rodham Clinton. It was probably more important to me, as I teach people and especially being from Arkansas, and we know all about Bill and Hillary and the young people they were growing up here. It was probably more important to me as I've taught my sons that people who say they're conservative should then act conservatively. People that say they're liberal should act liberally. People that say they're libertarians should be libertarians. And when so many people have said they're conservatives and their cause has been so righteous, and the seriousness of it, why, they're alarmist, aren't they? It's almost as though the next day our nation could just totally collapse if you listen to them before now. But if for things that were already known about their candidate, they can then walk away, they're the ones who are contradicting their very cause, and they're the ones who will be the reason for the outcome should their candidate not win, should we have liberal justices appointed, should we lose more rights, for example, gun rights, should abortion continue. It'll all be on their hands now. And that's good news, because I've taught my sons, find out who's actually responsible and then hold them responsible. But don't be distracted by distractions. And that's enough. But the new party now is called the Cons-ervatives. And they don't vote pro-life, but their bumper sticker will say Cons-ervatives, we vote pro-vanity, because apparently that's enough for them to pretend that their grand cause with global implications is worth moving away from and denying. So pray for your nation, pray for your leaders, but on November 9th, the outcome will have not been determined by Democrats, not by Libertarians, not by the Green Party, but by the grand old party who stood tall and firm, saying they're going to do what's right for our nation. That's why hundreds of them are pulling away from the very thing they've invited us to support. And it's certainly been a lot of pressure on pastors. My goodness, look at the relief we get now. Pray for those men. Maybe they'll mind after their own principles, and before November 8th, at least be consistent if you're a conservative, but don't be a con.